Okay, so first thing we're going to do here is to get started on our to-do list is to install some dependencies. So Meteor wants us to install React and React DOM, obviously. So let's do that. I'll just copy paste this into our terminal, and we're going to go ahead and close the app. And then just, oh, that was dumb. I can just open a new tab. So we'll go to cd to-dos and we'll paste, and it should install React and React DOM and add it to our package.json. It uses npm, so if we go like this and we'll refresh, check package.json, we've got React and React DOM now installed. So let's close that. Next step, I think they're going to want us to mess with the main file. There it is, main HTML. To get started, we'll replace the code of the default starter app. Okay, so let's do that. We're going to change the title, and we're going to give the React a target to render the app to. So let's go ahead and set the ID of our to-do app to something called render target. That's what we're going to name it. So we're going to go to client, main. Let's delete. They want us to delete everything, obviously. Replace the code of the default starter app. So we're going to do all that. We're going to delete. Boom. All of this. You know what? I'll leave this, and we'll say welcome to to-do app. Okay, and we'll change the title to to-dos. Let's delete all the templates. Boom. Okay, and now if you know React, this should make a lot of sense. You're just gonna create a container, basically, that when you create your React app, it renders it to that HTML file, whatever your main file is. So we're going to use an ID. You can use a class as well. So we'll make a div. We'll do ID equals render target. Whoops. And we'll close this div. So this shouldn't do anything. It's just given our excuse me, our container an ID. So then we're going to go ahead and create our JSX file. Now JSX is the language used by React. It's sort of a HTML JavaScript combination. And we can just go ahead and copy paste this. If you want to really learn React, if you don't know React, it's probably a good idea not to copy paste this, but I will, because I'm pretty familiar with React already. So I'll explain it a bit if you're not familiar. So basically, we're going to save this. We're going to open the JavaScript file. Let's delete all of this because we don't need any of it. And we'll paste. Whoops. Sorry, I'm using Vim here, and they've got a couple strange commands. But overall, Vim's pretty cool. So give it a look if you don't use Vim, or if you don't use any sort of customizable text editor. I usually try to stay away from fancy stuff, because you get distracted by all the cool tools and whatever. But Vim's actually pretty awesome. You don't really need to use the mouse that much. But anyway, getting off track here. So basically, we're importing React, we're importing Meteor, and the render method from from React DOM, and we're also importing an app component that we haven't created yet, but we will create it eventually. And then what we're doing is we're just setting a place for this app. We're creating an instance of app here, and then we're setting a place for this app to mount to. So you'll see the ID is render target, and if you remember, in our main HTML, we gave this an ID of render target. So let's go ahead and move on to the next step, which is to actually create that app component. Whoops. I went over to GitHub. Okay, so we're just gonna again copy paste it. I know this seems kind of lame that we're copy pasting, but the whole point of this is not to learn React. It's just to sort of go through Meteor and how Meteor works and how it renders data and gathers data and publishes data, etc., etc. So we're just gonna copy paste all of the React stuff, and we're gonna create. You know what they want us to do? They want us to change the folder structure a bit, so we're also going to do that. We're going to create a new folder called imports, and inside it we're going to put a folder called UI, and then we're going to create a component called app.jsx. And then we're going to paste all this stuff, so let's do that. We'll go and create a new folder called imports, and then a new folder called UI, and then a component called app.jsx. So there's imports, and then we'll go in here and we'll paste everything that we copied. Should probably really create a a hotkey for that no paste command, because I got to type it every time, but it's whatever. As you can see here, it's fairly simple. We import React. We're also going to create a component called task. We haven't done that yet. We'll do that in a few minutes, and then we'll create some methods. We'll create a get tasks method, a render tasks, and if you know React, you know that every React needs a render method, and that's exactly what we've done here. In our return of the get tasks method, we basically just created it's just dummy data. Here we're not like using an API of any sort. You can do that if you want, but right now we're just creating dummy data, and it's basically a couple objects. It's an array of objects, as you'll see here. It returns an array of 3 objects. Each one has an ID, and it's got a body, and they use the word text as the key for body. So, and the value is, this is task 1, this is task 2, this is task 3, etc., etc. The render tasks method basically just loops through all the tasks, and if you know React, this right here, this key or this task instance is just that. It's an instance of a child component that we're going to create. Excuse me. That we're going to create. I'm sorry, we haven't created it yet. We'll do that right now, and we've given it some props. So that's how React works. You create an instance of a child component inside the parent component file, basically, and you give it a key. That's just something required by React, and then task is a prop that we're going to be using to access the ID and the text properties. So I know that may have been kind of confusing if you don't know React. Again, this probably isn't the best starter tutorial for React. So let's go ahead and create the next component. Next component is task.jsx, and I'm going to create it in the same folder. So I'll just copy paste that, and let's do task.jsx, and we'll paste that. Okay, save that, and as you can see, well, first we import React, prop types, component, etc. And in our render method, we're rendering this .props.task.text. So whenever we want to render a prop from a parent component, you do this .props, right? And some of the properties that we used in our parent file, don't worry about the key for now. That's just something React requires to make every item unique. But basically, task is the keyword we used for this prop. So this is basically the task prop. Now this can be anything. This can be, house equals task, but it's better to just keep it as task so that you don't get super confused. Keep the same word. It just makes it a lot more simple. And then we're going to be using task. Keep in mind that task is the the argument that we passed into the map function. So basically, it's taking every single one of the items and assigning them to the task argument. So this task in here, right here, is this is the same. It corresponds to this one here. So then we're calling this .props.task, and we're accessing the text properties. The text property right here. See that? Okay, so we do that right here. We access this .props.task.text. And again, this isn't a React tutorial, but basically in React, whenever you want to render JavaScript inside JSX, you use curly braces. So we'll do this again. We'll do curly brace, this .props, right? Because we want to access props, .task.text. Okay? And that should be it. So next thing we're going to do is go ahead and see if this worked in the browser. Let's see if what it looks like. So we'll go to localhost, and it should have automatically refreshed, and there you go. You got your tasks. So basically, I can change this in our parent component, in our list. Sorry, and it should change. So we'll go over to it's a little small here. We'll go here and we'll say this is task. Okay, how about this? I like cupcakes. And you'll see it re-renders, or it should re-render, and tell me that I like cupcakes as our first to-do list, which makes no sense, so we'll just change that back to this is task 1. Okay, so we've done a little bit of React, and that's basically nothing really Meteor related. The only thing Meteor here is, I should have mentioned this, is that we want, when we first created the main.js file, we use this method called meteor.startup. So that's basically telling us that we want to render this this app instance when the client starts up. So the meteor.startup method is pretty handy for doing that. That's just one of the cool things about Meteor. You can use meteor.startup to tell it when you want to render a certain component and where you want to render it to. So I think the next thing is to add some styling here, which is something we don't really need. Let's read about the Meteor startup here actually. Some initialization code and a meteor.startup block which knows how to call code when the page is loaded and ready. The code loads the other components and renders them into render.target. So basically when meteor.startup executes, or it executes when the page is ready to go, and then everything else, all the child components of app, get called of that instance of app. So everything else here is about React, JSX, etc., etc. So we should see this. Obviously, it doesn't look like that because it's not styled. But let's go ahead and just copy the CSS, which is just some basic stuff that they created so that we can use to make it look pretty. We'll copy that, and we're going to go ahead and add it to our CSS file. Okay, cool, great. Now it should look different. It should automatically reload as well, so we'll see. There you go. They gave us some cool stylings. We've got a nice header, and this here doesn't have styling because I added that, so we'll take that out. And that should be in our HTML. Here, let's take that out. And there we go. Alright, so we're going to continue in the next video where we're going to learn about Meteor collections, which is where we store data, create and store data. So we'll see you there.